I wrote a short story, I
Sorry.
wrote a short story, you're good, version of what would become my debut novel, Tyler Johnson Was Here. That's a book about police brutality and inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement, which are issues that I felt were prevalent to the community that I grew up in on the west side of Indianapolis. I mean, those are issues that are prevalent like in our country and in our world, but I felt like that was something that was underrepresented, under discussed in the YA book world, and so decided that as a way of activism and resistance and speaking up, I wanted to share um, a story that felt personal to me and that affected my community and my family. And so, yeah, so since then, I came to college at Ball State University, and I just kind of stuck around Muncie ever since I left college, and have just been enjoying living here and enjoying Indiana. Recently transitioned into being a full-time author, which has been really fun, getting to just write stories and talk to young people about stories all the time. Just so fun to do. Yeah.
All right, awesome. You talked about going to the library and doing a lot of reading. Did you go to the Wayne Township Library? Just
I
curious.
did.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Um,
what were some of your favorites? What books do you remember that were important to you when you were younger?
mhm. Gosh, that's a good question. I feel like I was one of those strange people that actually really enjoyed checking out like classics. So I read like The Great Expectations and 1984 and like books like that, and I was like just really enjoyed reading those things. The Catcher in the Rye, but then eventually like I started checking out like um books like Harry Potter and more YA books. I have to think about. I have to think more about what books that I remember. Um, but I know like one series that I was like super obsessed with, like in my earlier times of reading, like when I was in maybe like middle school, was the Captain Underpants series, which is like a. Um,
Yep.
they might still be going actually. I don't know.
I think they are.
But
Yeah.
okay,
We still have people asking for them at the high school because they just
it's
remember
great.
like really making
Yeah,
a connection with them.
yeah. I just really enjoyed how funny they were. Um, and that like I just got so much like enjoyment out of sitting down and slowing down and reading something that felt really easy to read. And that was obviously something that was very different than reading like a classic book, which it's a lot harder to read and a lot harder to focus on, but still like a um, an experience that like kind of transports you into like a different space and time. So yeah,
Yeah. Well, how did growing up in Indianapolis kind of mold you into the writer that you've become?
sure. Growing up in Indianapolis, I feel like Indianapolis seems to be like a really diverse place to live. I feel like in my time of growing up there, like I encountered so many people from different walks of life, like with some similar experiences to me and very different experiences to me, things that I've never had to go through, or things that I never had to experience, but were still things that like influenced me and touched me in some way. Um, and so meeting those people along the way and creating those relationships has helped me as a writer be able to write realistic worlds that are like diverse and inclusive, because in both of my books, Tyler Johnson Was Here and in Things We Couldn't Say, it was very important to me to write characters and communities that looked like the ones in Indianapolis, like that looked like the diverse and unique and lively people that I encountered, from various different walks of life, various different backgrounds and experiences, and I feel like it's really become like an important value to me. It's just to prioritize that in anything that I write because it's important. Nothing about Indianapolis is monolithic. You know, like you can go to one side, and it's such a big place, big city, that you can go from one side of town, it's completely different than the other, and there's like different cultures there, and there's different dynamics there, and it's also like unique and fascinating. And I think, um, what better place, you know, even to set a book in, you know, than Indianapolis. So, and I just know it so well. You know, I feel like I know it so well, even better than Muncie. And I've been here for,
Yeah.
as an adult for a while now. So
Well, in Tyler Johnson Was Here, you have, you know, a police action shooting, and what happens as a result of that. Where did you come up with your ideas for this novel? And talk about too, like your age when you began it.
sure, yeah. So I remember, um, I was watching the sort of trial or hearing of George Zimmerman, who was the one who killed, shot and killed Trayvon Martin, and was just completely taken aback by. And at this point, I was maybe uh, freshman or sophomore in high school at Ben Davis, so I can't remember how old I was then, but that was the general season that I was in, and I was like just so upset and angry at what was happening. You know, it felt like this guy was going to get to actually not face any consequences for what he did to Trayvon Martin and his family. Um, and the kind of conversations that I felt like were happening on the news channels and even on social media was this debate between like, did Trayvon Martin deserve what happened to him? Like, you know, was he actually like a bad person or a thug? And, you know, essentially saw people justifying kind of what happened. And there was this like debate that was happening, which I was like, man, like this person is a human being. Like Trayvon Martin, his life mattered. But not a lot of people, it seemed, were willing to like fight for that or to acknowledge that. And it took me back to when I was a little boy and witness my cousin, you know, like a family member of mine, like lose his life to police violence and gun violence, and um, saw how no one really acknowledged that, or no one really talked about that. Like it didn't make, the front page news. It didn't make national television. It was something that just kind of happened in our community, and people like moved on, and just felt like out of a place of anger and frustration of like what kinds of conversations were being had, and how like no one's affirming that this person's life mattered or was important, that they were significant. That then drew me into wanting to do something to like resist that, and to um, essentially step into like being an activist in some way. And I knew that my power came from words. My power came from telling stories. And I remember writing a short story for Tyler Johnson Was Here that I shared with like a teacher, and I shared with some friends and some family members, and they all like really affirmed that like it was an important story that needed to be told, and had encouraged me to maybe try writing it in like a book in some capacity, like maybe some sort of nonfiction story. Um, um, but I decided that I was gonna just make it a longer fiction, fictional story, but based it and root it in um, my life, my own experiences with it. So the personal side, but also like the societal and like nationwide kind of like conversation. So joining the conversation of like the Black Lives Matter movement, and what really is the driving force behind like, what do we mean when we say that, Black Lives Matter. And yeah, and so I started writing the longer novel, and it became very apparent to me that I had something, like that something was like, I felt like a feeling in my gut of like, oh man, this could be something that will reach people, that will like be a mirror for people who feel like that their stories have been forgotten or neglected in some way, and kind of a window for some people to look into if they're on the other side, if they've not been involved in those conversations, if they've not seen those things in their community or in their family. And I believe that's happened ever since the book has come out, that like those conversations have happened in schools and in families, and I get emails and reviews all the time about people who felt like seen by my book, but also like challenged in some way as well in their perspective on things. And so that's all I could ask too. And so that book came out when I was a freshman in college, which is like
It's incredible.
kinda, so
Yeah.
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 Been a
Very,
great journey.
very, very impressive. Very impressive. Before your next book, you had said previously that you kind of had a break in between Tyler Johnson Was Here and Things We Couldn't Say. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what you were going through at that time and what was happening?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I took a couple years off of writing between publishing Tyler Johnson Was Here and then like even starting to write Things We Couldn't Say. Um, just as I was mentioning, like as people like were reacting to Tyler Johnson Was Here, my debut about like racism in the Black Lives Matter movement and things like that, and police brutality. I got a lot of reviews from people who were just really upset that I wrote the book. People who were just saying really mean and nasty things about me and to me. A lot of hate mail that I received through my email and through to my house from people who were just so angry and threats and things like that. It was really hard for my mental health and for my. I just felt so just stuck and trapped between like wanting to like please people and wanting to release something that like everyone loved and everyone like took something positive away from, but also realizing that there's so many people out there who are just gross, and it was just kind of like I can't write anything else. Like I just felt so fearful that the next thing that I wrote, like the same thing would happen, that people would send me really hateful messages that would make me feel like really insecure and really sad. And yeah, so I just, there was a period of time where I was like, I just want to give up writing completely. Like I've lost my voice, I've lost my way, and there's no way that I ever want to write again. And that was kind of my mentality for a while. And despite the fact that I had like a deadline and I had, a publisher and an agent and editors who were like, hey, we need your next thing. People want to read your next thing. We get that like this has been really hard for you. We're here to support you, but try, try to write again. And it took me a long, long time, but eventually I found a story that like I felt was like good to tell. And I learned practices of like, okay, in what ways can I like minimize entertaining the hateful reviews that I get for anything in the future. Like I will no longer read Amazon reviews, or I will no longer read, certain emails, like if it's an email that someone sends to me through my website, I make sure my agent is like probably one of the first people to see it, so she can kind of like help me weed through some of those things. And that's really helped me have a better like posture as I exist in the writing world. So
yeah. And I think that's important for all of us to just to know that you create your own self-worth, and it's not based upon what people say or do, that it's internal, and but that's hard to do in the midst of everything that we have going on around us with social media and everything else. That makes it difficult. So
right.
Yeah. Well, since we do have our creative writing students, will you tell us a little bit about your writing process, what you went through, not only in the writing aspect of it, but then the publishing aspect of it as well?
Yeah, so these two books had very, very different processes. For this one, Tyler Johnson Was Here. That one was more of like Like obviously I didn't have any deadline. I didn't have a like a contract. You know, I was just like writing a book to see if I could do it, you know, as a way of like putting my voice out there and fighting for my voice in a sense, but as a way of also proving to people and to the world that like, oh, like I can do something like this, right? Like this is something that is meant for me. Like I can do this. But because I had never had an experience of really writing like a like a novel before, like I decided that I was going to like plot it out. So I had a bunch of sticky notes and would put them all over my wall of like, here's some scenes, here's some like moments, some like um, things that will occur, like the rising action, the conflict, you know, here's like another conflict. And then I'll like draw arrows on the wall, like just to say, okay, this is going to go here and this is how it's going to flow here, and created like a bunch of like flow and bubble charts from like when I was in middle school. Like we learned to do that. I don't know if they still teach that, but I remember being like, this is like the worst because I always hated doing that when I was in school, but it served a real purpose because as someone who's like not a very good plotter, it was helpful for me to see like a visual of this, the arc of the story, you know, like here's the main purpose that I'm writing, right? But here's where the story begins and here's where the story ends. And I can see clearly like what happens along the way. And as I sat down to actually like, you know, stretch that short story into the longer length novel, you know, because again, Tyler Johnson started as a short story. As I went to stretch that into the full length novel, I was able to add like moments or dramatize even some of the events or moments that happened in the short story version. And so as I sat down to write, it just served me really well. And I'll save the publishing story for that in a second.
Okay.
But going to the writing process for Things We Couldn't Say was kind of the exact opposite for that book, because I found out I actually don't like plotting. You know, I like just sit down and kind of pants the story, you know, to kind of like sit with the characters, you know, like try to feel out the characters, understand more of who they are. I do these things called character interviews where I imagine that I'm like all of the characters at, you know, once, and then get to know everything about that character. Like, you know, what's their favorite color? Like, what is their greatest motivation? You know, who's their favorite musical artist? Like those kinds of things that like help me, you know, shape that character more. And then kind of pants it, you know, like allow the characters to take me on the journey of what's happening, and wherever I end up is where I end up. You know, I can go back and edit like along the way, but just sitting down and pantsing the story, getting it all out there is like really helpful for me, because I the details of like putting everything on like a post-it and like putting them on my, or like having like a chart, actually takes me more out of the creative process than like doing a more general, here's what the story is, here's who these characters are, let me allow them to like take me on this journey, and reveal to me what the story is a really beautiful, I mean, it gets you in trouble, it gets you in trouble with your editor who's like, Jay, this is 500 pages of just dialogue and characters being themselves, where's the plot, and so you have to kind of then go back and rework things. But I'm okay with that, because at least I know who these characters, which to me is like the best part of any novel, is like getting an understanding, to connect with the characters more so than like having an action-packed plot. So yeah, I'd say that would be the writing experiences of both of those. As for the publishing experiences, they also had very different journeys of publishing. So for Tyler Johnson Was Here, it was a very like fast process. Like I did get a lot of rejection. Like I remember sending out the manuscript to a bunch of literary agents, because in order to get traditionally published in today's world, you have to have like a literary agent, and that literary agent is a representative who kind of pitches you to publishers, so the big five publishers, then like the other publishers underneath that and things like that, to try to get you a book deal. And so for my first book, my agent, Ian, before you even got an agent, like I looked up how do you get one, like just on the internet. And I was like, how do I get someone to like represent me? And I came across like a bunch of websites that had just names and emails of like literary agents. And I remember like just taking a couple nights where I just like emailed my book to like all of them. And that's something that they like recommend you do. They're like, hey, do it in like small batches. But I was like, nope, I'm emailing 500 people tonight, my manuscript. And got a lot of people, hundreds of people who were like, no, like, this isn't good, or no, like, this isn't ready, or things like that, which were really, really discouraging. But it only takes one yes, right? Out of that 500 people, like there was one person who said, hey, could we hop on a phone call? And I was like, okay, this feels promising, And then I hopped on a phone call with this person who communicated that she really loved my story and really felt like, her putting her hand on it a little bit could be ready, to send out to publishers like within a matter of weeks, and essentially offered to represent me as my literary agent. And I've been with her ever since. So I signed with her, and she's been my literary agent since that moment, which was, man, I can't remember what year that was, but we've been working together for like 6 years. Time. And but I remember I was like because I was taking a summer class, and I was in my dorm at Ball State as a freshman, and I was emailing back and forth with her, and I was like, oh man, like I'm about to really have like a literary agent, and like this is really about to like happen. And we edited the book together for a number of weeks, and then within like a month, she had landed me like a book deal with one of the top 5 publishers like in the world, which was insane. Like I was like, this is wild, this is actually happening. New York Times article came out about me like the following like month, and like all this stuff just sort of happened, and I was like, I don't know, it just felt like really jarring and surprising, but really, really good experience, but a really difficult one, because you're having to weed through insecurity of everyone's rejecting you, everyone's saying no, like this isn't ready or this is not good. And there are, of course, people who are like, why are you telling the story, like, or change this about the story and then it'll be better. Like I had agents who were emailing me their thoughts. They're like, no, we're going to reject you, but if you make your main character like a white character instead, we would be willing to represent you.
Wow.
Which felt like that would not be the story. That would not be the story that I was wanting to tell. And so I decided that even if I made that change, that like I still wouldn't want to sign with that person because of the fact they would ask that. So that was difficult to navigate. So fast forwarding to things we couldn't say, obviously I was under contract now. So when I signed with my publisher for Tyler Johnson Was Here, they optioned my next book, meaning whatever I wrote next, they essentially had first dibs on getting to look at and getting to publish. It took me a long time to write anything, just because, of what I experienced from post Tyler Johnson Was Here, but was still like, okay, I know I got to sit down and write something. And so at the start of the pandemic, I, sat down and felt like this, the story of Things We Couldn't Say kind of just came to me, as like I was processing like grief and things like that, and the loss of just the pandemic. And I remember getting a draft to my editor, and they were like, okay, this is great. And then they're like, we got a couple edits, but then like everything else is set, like we can move forward with like publishing it. Like it just felt so easy. And then like the editor told me that they were leaving that publisher, and so I was going to get a new editor, and they were going off to something else. And I was like, okay, this is super sad, but I'm whatever, I can work with this new editor if we're going to move forward with publishing things we couldn't say. And this new editor comes along and it's like, here's everything that I think you should change, which was like, okay, man, I thought it was like ready. And based off, my work with the other editor, we both thought it was ready to move to the next stage. But this new editor's like, this needs to change, this needs to change. So I'm like, okay. So I'm going to listen to the, and make all these changes. And then this editor decides to leave. And I get another one.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, okay, finally, we're ready to move forward. And this editor's like, I don't think this is ready at all. Like, I think you should rewrite the entire thing.
Oh,
And
no.
so I'm like, oh my goodness. I was like, this is so discouraging. This is so hard. And I actually had to make some decisions with my agent on should we continue with this publisher or pull out and find a different publisher. And that's what we did. So I ended up moving over to Scholastic, and my lovely editor, David Levithan, has really honored my story and honored my vision. And it's been a real awesome and privilege just to get to work with him on things we couldn't say. And he's really seen how much work I put in it, like at my other publisher, and all that happened, and like losing 3 editors to shifting circumstances. So that was really difficult to navigate too, and I hope I never have to experience that again.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, but look where it ended you, because that's an incredible story with your editor. I mean, he's incredible. So yeah, very, very cool. It ended up being very cool. It wasn't very cool and that was happening. So we talk a little bit about your role as a composer and musician and what the importance of music has been in your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I shared this earlier with the other classes, but I feel like I like to say before I even was like a storyteller with words, I was a storyteller with notes. I was a storyteller with music, even instrumental or music without words. And I was always musical. Like I come from a musical family. My dad played tuba, my sisters played violin, my grandmother played the cello, like all these things. And so it's like just had music in my family. And when I was in middle school, I decided that I wanted to be in the school band. So I joined the concert band and the jazz band, and I played bassoon and tenor sax and a little bit of baritone. And just really had fun, just a ton of fun playing music with people and making music. And I remember getting just sheet music on what we would play for our next concert, and the band directors being like, here's the story behind this song that we're playing, this piece that we're playing. And it was like, wow, like, this is really cool. Like, music without words can tell a story. And I was like, man, I love that idea. Like, I love the idea of, like, it's just powerful, but I would go home every night, every time we got new music, and I would research like that piece, and I would look up the composer, and usually that composer was, an old white guy, which was fine. I mean, it was really good music, but it was something that was like, oh man, like I want to see music like this written by or composed by people who look like me, people who come from communities like I've come from. That kind of representation was important and mattered. And out of a place of like, I want to see if I can do this, like I decided that I'd go home and try to like compose something. And so I downloaded like a free music notation software and just was playing around, like seeing what sounded good. And I would hear the playback and would enjoy what I heard, and just kind of cultivated that practice, and like got better at it over time by like, again, just practice and time. And so eventually I got to compose things that I actually thought were worthy to be played by other people. And then I would let friends, play my music, and I would record them playing it, or I would send it out to different groups. And my very first like full length piece that I ever wrote was a piece that I like pitched to this conductor in Japan, who then performed it with his ensemble in Japan and sent me like recording on my birthday. That was like this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful recording. But it was like, man, like this is a really cool thing. Like I'm storytelling through music, and started to see if I can get that published, like my music published from different music publishers. And I did. I have a few pieces out that are still selling well and that are still being performed by schools all over the world, like not even just America, but all over the place. And it's cool to see like in the ways that my books or my literature might not be reaching certain people, my music might be. And it's cool to have that kind of influence too, in the ways that I can tell the same things, like the story, I can talk about, the issues of Tyler Johnson Was Here, but in a classical way. And it touches someone in a completely different way. And I just feel really privileged to be able to do that. That I've been able to cultivate those sort of giftings in my life to be able to like reach the world in that way.
Yeah. Well, tell us how you kind of merged your two passions together with your music and your books, which was especially evident in Things We Couldn't Say. How did you put those things together?
Yeah, and Things We Couldn't Say, for those of you who've read it or plan to, it incorporates lots of references to music and incorporates different playlists. And music is something that, every day, like I'm listening to some sort of music, or it's just, I feel like it's important to my life that it just feels like a value, like a core value of mine. Unfortunately, these days I'm not doing a ton of composing, or as much as I would like to be doing. And I'm just now trying to figure out in what ways can I like better blend the two together. But recently, in the last year, a school in, I believe, Minnesota reached out to me they commissioned me to write a piece for their high school band that was essentially a piece that was based off of this book.
Oh, wow.
Because they were like in their English classes, they were reading my book. And so in their band classes, they were wanting to like have a piece that like, paired with this, so that they can have conversations, extended conversations, not just in their English classrooms, but also in their band, classroom. And I was like, man, like what a beautiful experience that could be, and what a beautiful, thing for me to be a part of, and to witness that, and like in the ways that like those classes can like, do some sort of immersive learning opportunities there. So yeah, I end up composing something and sent that over to them, and they've since said that it's been really like awesome to see the kind of conversations that they've had, both in the band room, but also in their English and language arts classes. So, and I hope that, the more that I kind of do both of those things in my future, the more I'm able to kind of like have opportunities to blend those two together. And I'm currently working on, this has been like years in the making, but a middle grade novel. So for younger readers, that is a novel, but it actually it has a soundtrack to it of classical music, because it's about a kid composer.
Oh.
They're really excited to both write the book, but also compose the music that comes with the book. And so that's also something I'm gonna blend the two together.
Yeah.
Looking forward to that.
Well, what else are you working on right now?
Yeah. I shared this last time too. I was like, there's not a whole lot I could share about it, unfortunately. But one project that I'm really looking forward to is I've been working with Netflix on something that's been really, really fun. And talking with producers are just super fun. It feels like, the producers of certain shows and things like that, like, you just don't know a whole lot about them, but they're like the ones they're the brains behind everything good, on Netflix. And so getting to hear their vision for things and me to share, it's been really a fun experience. And more information on what the secret mysterious project is will hopefully be out later this year. So that's something that I'm working on. I've been really, really busy with that. I'm like for months. And then I'm working on my next young adult novel. My next original young adult novel, kind of halfway through writing it. That's my first attempt at writing like a love story. Like obviously love is a theme in all of my books, but this is my like hopefully first attempt at like a traditional love story. We'll see if it works. And if not, I've tried. So that's
Does
something
it take, does it take place in Indiana as well?
it actually does. It takes place in Indianapolis.
Okay. Okay.
So
Excellent. So something else to look forward to. I like it.
yeah.
I like it. I love it when that really resonated with me and things we couldn't say. In that my daughters went to Ben Davis High School. So you write about places at Ben Davis High School that I'm very familiar with. And we also have a lot of our students who transferred from Ben Davis to come here to Avon. And so I know that they'll see so many places that they know in your books, which is really a really fun thing to be able to read. So
it's awesome.
So we're going to move to our student questions part of it. Miss Lynn, is Jenna Gridley there? Jenna wants to come forth and ask her question. Go ahead and unmute yourself to do that on the laptop. Ah, here we go.
All right, there you go. All right, so
oh, we got.
Okay, so my question was.
Oh no.
Okay, so my question was, what tropes do you love seeing, and what tropes do you hate, like in writing or even in shows and stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love tropes. I love talking about tropes. I'm probably not the hugest fan of like the love triangle. Like I love what is that? Twilight. I love Twilight. But I feel like that's the example that I think of when I think about like the love triangle, whatever. I just found them to be different and like something that I wouldn't be good at writing. I just couldn't do it. But kudos to those authors who nail it, and and they have a lot of success with it. A lot of my books have the trope of like found family, or very close friendships. And actually, I think both in Tyler Johnson Was Here and in Things We Couldn't Say, there's a trio of friends. There's always three of them, which I really stole from a lot of the, I mean, Harry Potter. I mean, you have Harry, Ron, and Hermione, and I feel like that sort of trope meant a lot to me. Like I feel like in my friend circles too, it's been a lot of trios, and so having that and supplementing or like contrasting to that, being like, this is not just like their friend circle, this is also their like family, like their family away from their family. Like these are the people who get them, like Ali and Aisha are the people who really understand Geo more so than even his own family like does. And so I feel like whenever I read a book that talks about like friendship in that way, or found family, especially books that that feature queer characters, like I feel like oftentimes those are the books that talk the most about found family, because if you are aware of like the queer community, like that's a family in of its own, right? Or the Black community, it's a family in and of its own, or things like that. So love books that talk about that trope, or use that trope.
Awesome. Is Joshua Hook there?
Josh Hook isn't here today, but on his behalf, he was curious on how do you take criticism from people who are not open-minded?
Excellent question. Taking criticism is an interesting phrase because I'm like, I don't know if I take it very well. Um, I barely like when my editor gives me advice. But I think I've had to learn, like, again, like, to stop seeking out criticism too, because I think sometimes people inevitably find a way to send me their negative review of my book, or like hate mail or something. They find a way. But there are oftentimes moments where I'm like on Twitter and I'm like searching like my book title to see what are people saying. Like I want to see what people are saying, and oftentimes I see people who've posted their reviews, and it's like oftentimes really positive, and they're praising the book or recommending it to a friend or someone they follow. But there are also times where there are people who are publicly, bashing it, or like stay away from this book, things like that, where it's obviously hard to like digest, right? It's hard to like see that. And there you do have that gut reaction of like, I have to say something, I have to intervene, I have to defend myself, or you retreat, right? And I feel like what I've had to learn is like, it's okay to be upset, it's okay to be angry, but sometimes I just have to like walk away or like step away, so that it doesn't like completely paralyze me from ever writing or ever wanting to like release something in a public sense again. So I think I've taken steps to like limit how much I look at things on Amazon or on Goodreads, but also I've asked my agent to help filter through email responses for me, so that like when people are sending me negative things, that she's able to kind of like weed through it before I have to look at it, which has been a helpful practice for me. But also just staying true to myself. Like I think staying true to like knowing that my story is important, that my stories matter, that they mean something to me. If they don't mean anything to anyone else, it means something to me, and that is the most important thing. So believing that and holding firm to that has been really helpful.
Is Madison there? Madison Caston. If you guys want to scrunch down a little bit so we can see your faces, that'd be awesome. There you go.
My question was, how do you go about writing teenage characters, especially when it comes to dialogue?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, I mean, I spend a lot of time with young people. I spend a lot of time with teenagers, usually because I'm doing things like this, and also just read a lot of YA. I used to teach teenagers, be around them all the time, and so I feel like I'm on TikTok, so I see all of your content, and I'm on social media, and I know, I really believe it in my very core that young people are the best content creators. They're the best people who are putting out the latest trends and things like that. And I'm just learning so much. I just consume so much of your content and your stories that I feel like I kind of internalize it, and it translates into the teens that I write in my stories. And I think I'm fortunate enough, I guess, to still be young enough to remember what I was like as a teenager, because I'm not that far removed from my teenagehood. So I can still draw back and recall things. But times have changed, right? Like there's still new lingo and new slang words and things like that I'm having to learn. But I'm learning from you guys, and I just feel like it's a process of like spending time with people who are like all of you, and then making my stories realistic to reflect you guys, because I'm learning so much from you all. So.
Right. Is Haley Rashi there?
My name's Aiden. Hallie's not here, so has writing about controversial topics ever gotten you in trouble in any sense?
Writing about controversial topics ever gotten me in trouble?
And the controversials in quotation marks, just so you know, like that's all relative, isn't it?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, because I'm always like, yeah, like it's controversial, but for whom? You know, like, so I feel like yes and no. Like I feel like in a lot of spaces that I have, like I feel like I just know so many people from various different backgrounds, and I've been, you know, I've spoken at so many conferences and schools where there are various different reactions, you know, like, you know, I remember being at a book event for Tyler Johnson Was Here, where a lady came up to me like mid presentation, like as I was giving my presentation, and like kind of like screamed at me for a period of time about like how racist I was for writing a book that would condemn white people or something like that, and was escorted out by, you know, security. And I was like, man, like that is what people are doing all the time online. But she had the audacity to, you know, to do that in a public sense, you know, at a book event for me, which for me was really difficult because it's like I am writing about issues that are so widely debated in, you know, our country and in the world, but they shouldn't be debated because we should all agree that, you know, the lives matter of all of those who have been gunned down by police officers, you know, who've died from gun violence, you know, wrongfully. But the fact that like I wrote a story that was like, hey, this is actually something that's inspired events in my life, but there's people who are actively resisting that, actively like trying to like silence me. I think what I have to do to that is not be silent. Like I can't sit back and be like, oh, okay, you're right. Like maybe I shouldn't share these stories, but instead continue to speak up and to raise my voice because it's important, because that kind of activism is what's going to produce like necessary change. And I think my inspiration has been teenagers. Like, I mean, young people, young adults have been the ones who are on the front lines of every social change movement. And as someone who writes books for those people, you know, I want to do my part in raising my voice and elevating those stories. And so my resistance has been activism against other people's resistance of my activism, you know? And so it's been a very difficult process and experience, but one that I have learned to kind of like navigate over time. Like I think initially it was really like, it was like almost like, oh man, like this is scary. Like people know things about me because they can read about me on the internet. Like, yikes. And I prefer to be a more private person. But now that I'm kind of like more on like I have more of a platform, I've had to kind of learn how to kind of not allow them to have such a stronghold in my life.
Yeah. I do want to ask, are there any library media students who have any questions? If you do, you guys can come forward. Journey, do you want to come forward to say hi? We'll see if she does. Journey McGuire is.
Oh, yes.
She's here. She's in one of my library media classes. And
Hi.
see, there you go. Journey, come on up. Journey, if you want to, you can unmute it if you want to say hi. You might have to step back just a little bit so we can see your face.
Hey, how's it going? Good to see you again. I like your hair.
Thanks.
Just got it done too.
Yeah. I was just talking. So Journey's mom talked to my mom, who then asked me if I was talking at Avon, and I was like, yeah. And I just piece all together this connection. So that's awesome.
Yeah. She told me she knew your family, so I thought that was pretty cool.
So,
yeah. All right.
I've known her for years.
Is D in Miss Lynn's class?
Oh, Ball State. I like it.
My question is, what made you choose diversity as a topic in a lot of your books? And is this coming from experience or is this something that you're passionate about?
Yeah. I feel like I learned to be passionate about diversity over time. But I think obviously living in Indianapolis, I mean, you guys can look around your classrooms and your school and see, in your communities even, and see how diverse it is, how all of you come from very different places. Like you might go to the same school, you might live in the same neighborhood or whatever, but you all have very different stories. And I think witnessing that and learning that about people, that like my story isn't the same story as like everyone else. Because being really, really young, like when I was like in elementary school, I just assumed everyone had the same life, that we all did the same thing, that like, you know, because my family struggled to kind of like get by often, that like, that's true for everybody. Like every family is the same as mine. But I think learning and hearing more stories from people has helped me recognize, oh man, like we're so very different. But like this should be more talked about in literature. Like, you know, a lot of the young adult books that I ended up checking out from my local library ended up being a lot of books about just white kids who are very privileged and had the nicest cars, you know, and we're still just, you know, sophomores in high school. And I was like, man, like that was not my experience, you know, of high school or of community or of, you know, life. And recognizing, oh no, like writing stories that reflected the world that we live in, the communities that we live in, was actually more important for me than like repeating kind of the structure of the stories that I like saw, you know, in books that I had access to kind of growing up when I was younger. So yeah, when I write, diversity is something that I am actually intentionally trying to like put into my stories. So it's like, I'm thinking about in what ways can I diversify my story, in what ways can I diversify the world. But with diversity comes a lot of research, because I'm writing about experiences that I don't have. Some experiences I do, but a lot of experience I don't. So I'm having to go and talk to people who identify in these places, or talking to people who might know other people, or might have resources to help me understand certain ethnicities or certain marginalizations and things like that. It takes work and takes time, but I think being able to do that has really, really enriched my stories like a lot. So,
All right, is Joshua Fairchild there?
No. My whole group is missing, so
Oh
I'm
no, okay.
representing Josh. So Josh wanted to ask, how has writing changed your perspective on the world? I love that question too. So
how has writing changed the perspective of the world? Yeah. Again, I mentioned how words to me has been my power. Words for me have been a source of influence in some ways. You know, for some people, my stories have acted as a mirror, as like a way for people to see themselves represented, to see themselves and their experiences kind of brought into the light, so that they don't have to stay in darkness. Like I've heard people say that to me at events. They, you know, come to me with just an abundance of gratitude for writing the book, or having even like, you know, brown boy on the cover, you know, of my books, because, you know, that's not as common as we need it to be. You know, it's becoming better, you know, it's getting better, and we are seeing more and more diverse stories being released, which I'm really, really grateful for. But I think books and writing has the power to change lives, you know, and there are people who might not identify, you know, with some of the characters in my story, but my books still serve as a window for them to be able to like look into someone else's shoes, to, take a moment to be immersed in someone else's life who might be completely different from them, who might have certain struggles and hardships that like we don't have to face. And I think that educates us, that creates empathy in us, that makes us more empathetic people to each other, helps us love each other better, helps us show kindness to each other, to elevate the voices of those who have long been forgotten. And so I think we've seen how that's changed society. We've seen how that's enlightened people, and how that's brought people together, and how that's started really difficult conversations, but that ended up being really these beautiful moments of peace and change. And that continues to be the case going forward. And so I believe writing is powerful and stories are powerful.
I love that, because you really do. I mean, that's how I've learned about just about everything in the world, is that through even just fiction reading, and learn about how other people feel and act and are through that reading, has been very powerful to me as a reader as well. So thank you for saying that, because I mean, that definitely resonates.
Yeah.
Definitely resonates. Is there anyone else with any other questions? Anything you've thought of that has been brought up as we've been having this conversation?
Schuster, you have one? Okay, go ahead. We do have a question.
Okay. Tell us your name.
I'm Schuster. I was wondering, were there any topics that you found especially difficult or testing to write about, and how did you overcome like your emotions and feelings behind that?
Yeah, absolutely. And things we couldn't say, there's a kind of sub plot or sub whatever that relates to like religion or relates to spirituality. And I don't want to spoil anything, but this can be a spoiler maybe. Geo, the main character, it's also on the cover. Isn't this such a shiny cover? His dad is actually a pastor of a church, and he's also kind of like an alcoholic, but no one apart from like Geo and his family like is aware of that or knows that. And I feel like that was really difficult for me, because it was really hard to kind of revisit a lot of like really traumatic experiences with my own dad being like someone who is an alcoholic and kind of manipulated like religion to be this like thing that like was actually more of an abusive tactic than like a loving tactic. And not that I mean, my dad struggles with addiction or whatever, like I don't fully fault him for that. But at the same time, I recognize like the ways that it's like directly affected and hurt myself and my family. And I feel like having to revisit that was really healing for me. Like it was really healing for me to like share and incorporate that into like Geo's story and in his life, and in things we couldn't say. But it was also really hard to like think about that. And I just did a lot of research too. Like I heard stories from people like online and people in my life who had experience with alcoholism and religious abuse and things like that. And that was difficult for sure.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank you for your time today. It's been a great conversation, and really appreciate you talking with our students, our creative writing students and our library media students today. So thank you everyone for joining us. Sorry, and I will have the recording available soon for everyone. So thank you again for your time. And I'm going to stop the recording here.